Yeah, I'm awake. I'm awake. Here I am. We're all set to go. It's October 16th, 2006, and we were to have with us today Diane Kleiman to talk about customs corruption. She was with us last Monday, is due to be on with us next Monday, but I did get an email Saturday and Sunday that she's in for surgery right now on this very Monday, so obviously she can't be with us. I don't know the details about it. Looks like she's going to be okay. She said that she's going to get in touch with me tomorrow, so that bodes well for her health issues. So Diane Kleiman will not be on with us today, but she will be back with us next Monday. So you know what that means, right? We're going to play one from the vault, and I'll tell you about that in a second, but while I got you here, let me just roll through the guests that are coming up for the rest of the month. They may or may not be put up on the website at this moment, but while we got a couple of minutes, let me do this. Let's see, tomorrow we're going to have a garage sale, and we're going to talk about the North American onion. And also on Wednesday, we'll have on August Bullock. Wrote a really interesting book called The Secret Sales Pitch. We'll have Andy Colvin on Thursday for part 13. We will have on a gentleman that will talk to us about what he's learned about Columbine. That's on Friday. And then on the 23rd, Diane Kleiman is due back with us again, and of course she is the former U.S. Customs agent. On the 24th, we're going to have on James Lloyd of Christian Media Network. On October 25th, we'll have on Sandra Utley, author of Dunblane Unburied. And I want to let you folks know that over the weekend I did a couple of interviews because of time differences. Sandra Utley is in the UK. I also spoke to Andrew McGregor. He is in Australia. Now, Sandra Utley has written Dunblane Unburied, which is about the Dunblane Massacre in 1996. Andrew McGregor is doing research on the Port Arthur Massacre that took place in Australia, again in 1996. I believe, yes, Dunblane happened in March. The Port Arthur Massacre happened in April, only a few weeks later. So they'll be pre-recorded, but they'll be pretty interesting things because now something's taking shape, and it was kind of interesting talking to Sandra Utley, that she's starting to realize there's a pattern here that she had not known about when she wrote the book. So there's an epiphany going on there. Also, it kind of cements the case that these incidences were not necessarily perpetrated by lone nuts. All right, so that's Sandra Utley on the 25th. And on the 27th, we will have on Andrew McGregor on the Port Arthur Massacre. And in between, on October 26th, we'll have on the Mothman's photographer, Andrew Colvin, on once again. On October 30th, Monday, Bob Chapman's going to try to make it back with us. He was unable to get in contact with us. He does have phone problems quite frequently over the years. We've had probably the most difficulty with Bob. But he's going to make it back on October 30th. And then, as only fitting, on October 31st, we're going to have on the Freeman perspective. Freeman was on before. We're going to talk more about occult symbology. All right, now, with the show you're going to hear of today from the vault, this was recorded the show was first done on August 13th, Friday the 13th, 2004. And that may ring a bell with the number of Floridians because that's the day that Hurricane Charlie hit Florida. What's interesting about this show is that we have been in the radio station and kind of in an emergency mode and not doing any regular scheduled broadcasting. I can't say regularly. And we were just cleared to do so, but we had to keep an eye on the weather. Harry was impressed into doing emergency management duty as a hammy and also in charge of a certain evacuation shelter, which would be St. Leo's. Also, TC was in the studio that day. He was monitoring the weather just in case Charlie decided to change its mind again. We were spared by that. I don't believe it ever hit a Cat 5, but it was bound to do such, and that would have been bad for us coming right over the top. Now, the guest for that show is Andrea Psoras, not necessarily a household name, but she's a very intelligent woman, is hip to what's going on, and also happened to be downtown on 9/11/2001 and witnessed the second WTC impact. So she's with us today, Andrea Psoras. This is a show from the vault, and we will be back with you tomorrow with the garage sale, North American Onion, and a couple of guests. So I'm going to switch modes right now, and we're going to go to that show on August 13th, 2004.
Hello again, and I cannot tell you what kind of day this has been and is still being. This is August 13th. Yes, it's Friday the 13th, and it's behaved as such. This is Vyzygoth. Harry is busy doing a couple of things. He's attending to an evacuation shelter, as his wife is. He's also, as his wife is, a hammy, and they're involved, obviously, in getting information out throughout the county. For those of you who do not know and should not necessarily know what's going on down here, we had good old Charlie, Uncle Charlie, yes, who turned. Did we hit a Cat 5 hurricane yet?
No.
All right.
We're between 2 and 3 right now.
All right, but it did reach 4 status at one time. It's now over land. We thought the eye was going to come right over us.
Over Charlotte Harbor right now.
All right.
In Charlotte County.
But thus far we're okay, though, right? I mean, it looks like we're out of the woods so far.
So far.
All right, and those things may change, and if we have to interrupt the broadcast to give you late-breaking news with regard to weather, and the one thing we always forget about with hurricanes, and that with them come tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
So, at any rate, strap yourself in. It's going to be a wild ride. We'll join our guest in a moment. I'm going to keep her anonymous just for the moment. She is someone who had a very dramatic experience, let's say, on September 11th, 2001, and she knows much, much more. We'll be with her in a minute. And now to our guest, getting a little showbiz out of this. Would you identify yourself for us?
Hi, yes. Hi, my name is Andrea Psoras, and thanks, Viz, for having me as a guest on your program and to talk with your listeners tonight.
All right, now tell us something. What was your life like in the morning hours of September 11, 2001?
It was perhaps a little different than what it had been, maybe a year or two before that. But on that particular morning, I prepared myself to go downtown and go to work where I had only begun working it was about a week before I'd begun working and doing contract work at Merrill Lynch. Maybe I should keep the companies where I've been private, but I just happened to have been in that building. Okay. So maybe going forward, but in any event, so I happened to have. However, financially, I encountered a great deal of pressure, and perhaps we'll share with the listeners how, having been a Wall Street a person who'd worked on Wall Street and in mergers and acquisitions, where typically the salaries are high and people enjoy significant financial prosperity. But my life, however, had gone through some different circumstances, and so I barely had enough pocket change to go downtown that day to be working where I was going to for the people where I was going to work. And as I prepared to leave earlier than usual to give myself enough time to walk, and it was approximately 2.5 miles from where I lived at that point to get to the downtown area, including the Trade Center and the World Financial Center. And we had extraordinarily beautiful weather that day. It was perhaps the most clear and just delightful weather. And as I got into the downtown area where I could see the towers, and they looked spectacular. I mean, they were just, and these were, I wouldn't say they were nondescript buildings. I mean, they were very tall, but there was nothing very particularly attractive about them.
Right?
They just were extraordinarily tall, and they were these skinny not obelisks, skinny, flat-topped buildings. And although one of them had the radio towers on the top,
right. The obelisk
it wasn't the AT&T building or the Woolworth building or even the AIG building where I used to work for a number of years, also in the downtown area. And that's also a unique building because that had been owned at one point by City Service, or Citgo Oil, which is a big, had been a former oil marketer in the Midwest. And that was the sister or the twin building, supposedly, to the Empire State Building. But so I wished I'd had my camera, and I'm actually a very good amateur photographer. But I didn't, and I looked at my watch, which I typically ran about 10 minutes ahead of time, and it said 8:45. And I cruised down Vesey Street between 7 World Trade and 6 World Trade, and I cross Vesey Street, or I go down Vesey Street, and then I cross what they now call the West West Street, but I had for many years that I've worked in New York knew it as the West Side Highway. And so I'm in an elevator and I'm headed to the floors where I'm supposed to work. And it's perhaps there's two buildings on the other side of West Street, a block up from where 6 World Trade used to be. And I'm in an elevator, and I arrive at the place where I'm supposed to be, and I have not an altercation, but things come up with the people where I'm supposed to work. And I was a little concerned over this particularly weird fire that had erupted, a personal fire. You know how we have this expression where we have these problems that happen in our lives, and I wasn't certain what the case was, and so I attempted to coordinate with some of the staff at the company where I was working. Not my contractor people, but the staff at the company where my contractors had me working. We get rumor at that point that a plane had hit One World Trade. And I said, what's this? I mean, no planes are allowed over New York City airspace. And for me, it was kind of such an odd thing, and I'm here thinking, it's probably some little propeller plane or something like that just wandered, into our area, and evidently, just how idiotic. But I didn't really take it terribly seriously, because in a way, it's weird, but my personal situation, and we have a propensity to do this, but my personal situation overrode, and at that point, it was only a rumor. We had no idea what had happened to One World Trade. But I figured I still needed to deal with these other things that had arisen in my personal life and my professional relationship for the firms where I was working. And so I went down to the mezzanine level in the building where I was, which is like practically right on the river, right on the Hudson River there. And while I'm standing there and I'm attempting to enter the suite of offices, my contractors for the door. And I'm buzzing, and I think this is really odd. And then it starts to occur to me that perhaps because of the rumor of what happened with One World Trade, they may have left the suite of offices, but it just seems so odd because I had no inkling that supposedly a passenger jet, had hit One World Trade. And then while I'm standing there, this just extraordinarily bizarre, loud screaming of what was a jet engine or a missile, but I did not, in other words, it sounded not quite, but sort of like a commercial jet, but not exactly like a commercial jet engine. And I theorized, I'm standing in this building with these thick walls, but then I realized, I've done enough flying in my life to know that I was not hearing what sounded like the engine of a commercial passenger jet. But I wasn't able to see this object, so I had no way of knowing whether I was even dealing with that or a missile or whatever. And the whole, that strange debate happens in your mind when you can't see, but you're still riveted. You're still in this situation where you have to choose to run or fight. Do I stay in the building? And you're looking at this massive, although beautiful building, and I thought to myself, well, gosh, if it is missiles, what if it comes down on me? You know what I mean? Put yourself in that situation. What if you heard this screaming sort of a jet engine or sort of a missile noise, and, it's just so bizarre to experience or encounter that while you're in the middle of, corporate beauty and luxury. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so I thought to myself, however, perhaps I'll stand a better chance by evacuating. But with those thoughts were people who began sprinting out of the elevator banks with just the expressions on their faces of practically abject horror. And I'm seeing this, and see, I know the Lord. The Lord introduced himself to me when I was 15. And I'll share with the listeners that at this point I'm 46. I've just had my 30th birthday in the Lord on February 2nd on Groundhog Day. And so, in knowing the Lord, we can reach into him, or we can reach into the Holy Spirit. We have this relationship by the Holy Spirit with the Lord, where we can still remain deliberative Do you understand what I'm saying?
Of course I do, yes.
And so, but it's still perhaps given the circumstances, I felt I perhaps should investigate going outside and so meanwhile, however, the security staff at that firm and at that building site were pushing everybody outside and not permitting them to remain inside or to go back inside. And there were hundreds, I don't know, perhaps 1,000 people or so were standing on the north side of this building, which was, and if you can figure in your mind a map of the north in a north-south direction, I was a block north and a block and a half west, or perhaps approximately 2 blocks west of the corner of where 6 World Trade and VZ Street and the West Side Highway were. And 1 World Trade was the next building south from 6 World Trade. So I recognize some people that I'm acquainted with, and but I said, I realized that I needed, because for the many years that I've worked and lived in New York, the towers and the complex had been such a part of my life, and to hear that the towers were burning and that they'd been hit with planes was it just wasn't sinking into my head, and I couldn't assimilate this information, which was just so utterly bizarre. And as I began to head east, and I'm crossing the West Side Highway, and I'm sort of startled, I'm attempting to not let the emotions of the enemy and the emotions of darkness rumble me, or to take a hold of my soul and hinder my mind from making the proper judgments in the Holy Spirit. And so, but I witnessed this sight of the emergency management vehicles, the EMS vehicles, lined up with their lights flashing in rows, like 3 or 4 rows, between along on West Street, where 6 World Trade and where 1 World Trade were, to prevent any and all traffic and pedestrians from coming into the area. But they were all lined up there, and they had, of course, no inkling as to what was to happen over the next 2 hours. But the utter shocking activities of the morning should already have alerted us to what was facing us. And so I progress east, and I'm witnessing the boiling smoke, black smoke, coming off of, and the orange flame. And colleagues of mine have reminded me, and other professionals that I've met along the way have reminded me that it was not a terribly hot flame. You were not looking at white hot flame. You were not looking at a huge amount of even, yellow-white flame. You were looking at a lot of orange and red-orange flame, which is a lower temperature fire. And so as I'm witnessing and I'll bring that up, we'll talk about that as an important point later on in our dialogue, and if the listeners want to jump in with an email. But I'm just still, again, in shock. And I would never have thought that I would have witnessed anything like this in my entire life, And the hit on 1 World Trade was, I would say, approximately the 80th or so floor, and you'll hear all different pieces of information. But frankly, I did not count every floor in 1 World Trade to determine where exactly supposedly this plane had smacked the building. And because I didn't physically witness the planes hit the building, I accepted the information that the administration purported, and that, what we were told by the press, and what supposedly, but do we have a break?
Yeah, we're coming up on a break, and if you can hold it right there, that'll be a good point. We're talking with Andrea Psoras, a witness to the WTC demolitions, we'll call them. You're listening to Grassy Knoll on AM 1350 WDCF and AM 1400 WZHR. We're simulcasting today, huh, Tom? Excellent. Okay, I might be wrong. All right, listen, we'll be back with Andrea after a couple of messages.
I could hide neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings. The 6 o'clock alarm would never ring. But it rings and I rise, wipe the sleep out of my eyes. My shaven razor's cold and it stings. Oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? You once thought of me as a white knight on his sleeve. Now you know how happy I can be. Oh, and our good time starts and ends without our loved ones to spend. But how much, baby, do you really need? Dear sleepy dream, oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer?
Just because you may be paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. The Grassy Knoll continues.
Yes, the Grassy Knoll continues despite hurricanes. And we are simulcasting. The reason I hesitated was because we are a triumvirate network, WTAN 1340, WDCF 1350, WZHR 1400, and we've had different programming on at times because of what's taking place here in Florida on this August 13th. Which is Charlie meandering about the state. And Andrea, I was remiss in not introducing you to one of the members of our team, shall I say, the Thought Criminal.
I would like to think so, anyhow.
Say hello to Andrea, Thought Criminal.
Hi,
Charlie?
Andrea.
Huh?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
I heard Biz say your name a little earlier in the program, and I thank you for including me in the program tonight.
Well, you're very welcome.
Hey, glad to talk with your listeners. And I wanted to remind your listeners they should probably do a web search on the different sorts of satellites that the NRO, which is the National Reconnaissance Office, and probably also the NSA are involved with, because some of these, both government as well as private satellites, are powerful enough to alter weather patterns, and I believe at this point are now powerful enough upon any human interest, like a commercial interest or a secret state interest now, to play with the weather.
Well, that's another whole thing in itself. You're right. Obviously, you know it and I know it, and I think maybe Thought Criminal may have gotten some information from me or someone else along the lines. But in 1996, the Air Force wrote a white paper about how they're going to modify. Right. And one of the things they wrote about back in 96 is that, and this was, of course, hypothetical. Well, not hypothetical, but it was future-oriented. They said we would change the weather. One way was by chemical injection into the atmosphere, hence chemtrails.
Right.
And Andrea, I got to tell you, it warmed my heart so. I guess it was on Thursday as we were battening down the hatches and getting ready for this thing to come around, right? And amongst all these low clouds that broke away, it warmed my heart to know that our military was up there, just chemtrailing the crap out of us up there. Thanks, guys.
It's like as if they don't have enough, to waste our money to do. You know what I'm
bomb
saying?
Somebody? I know. Yeah, leave us alone.
Oh, God.
Working on
then,
bombing people.
You know what's interesting? At one point, I stumbled on AF 2025.
Exactly.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yep, you sent it to me, but I had it. You got it.
Okay, and I have a feeling you've probably well-informed your listeners on something like AF 2025, so we're probably all on the same page, to use the expression.
Right, they may not agree, but they know that it's out there. They can go read it for themselves. They said they were going to do it, and they're doing it.
Well, absolutely, and I think that although perhaps at that point it was purported to have been, or continues to be purported to us to be, a theoretical piece, I think if you look at everything that's happening around us, I think it was the airport's part of, or fitting into this whole process that the New World Order is attempting to do. But as Alex Jones has indicated, he said if even 1% of the Americans rise up well-informed and push back against the tyranny, it will fold, because a lot of it is the illusion.
Well, only about, 3 to 5% of the colonists?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a good point, But, for all intents and purposes. Our Constitution hasn't been, there's been so many ways it's been eroded. But as far as we know, and yes, it's true, they have continued to chip away at rule of law and continue to chip away at the republic. However, to we who still understand, it's what we've got to work with. And so, with that, we've got to take our step forward, and we can't let, whether there's some legal, idiotic legal or pseudo or de facto legal claim that the British or the British Crown continues to purport that it has over us.
They don't?
We still have our Declaration of Independence where we say we're breaking away from the British Crown. We specifically identify 3 entities in the Declaration of Independence from which we were liberating ourselves: the King, the British people, and the British Crown. And I think a lot of Americans need to read that, and I think because unfortunately the Supreme Court only began its existence when the Constitution was ratified, or drafted and approved, this seems to be where there's a stop point. They don't tie the Declaration of Independence enough, as if keeping that as a preamble for the Constitution, you see. And so that's sort of, if anything, where the courts have been facilitating the drift into this colonialistic commercialism, forthright, pale horse. I mean, there's lots of different ways to describe at this point, this, whatever this, spiritual, and there is a spirit behind it. There is spirit behind what we're encountering.
Oh, sure. And another thing, though, too, Andrea, and I want to get back to your experiences that day. I was going to say, as you rolled off what we were supposedly freed from, but the one thing is I whispered to Thought Criminal as you were speaking, and that is, but they got us through the banks,
And that's a good point, and thank you. Actually, it's interesting because I don't know who I was talking with about this last night, but during Lincoln's administration, they had Lincoln over a barrel because the British were going to come in, both the British and the French were going to come in on the side of the South.
Right.
I think your listeners and you are reasonably informed on this matter.
Galen Ross, as you know, spoke to that when he was on last time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I hadn't done enough reading on Skull and Bones, but I was aware because my experience on Wall Street has been with respect to the banking and financial sector. One of my pastors gave me Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Right.
And I already had some inkling on the financial system, but what's coincidental is that I had begun over time to understand more about the Fed, and there are other books in the public domain that aren't quite as detailed or as insightful as Griffin's work. And there's Secrets of the Temple, and perhaps a few other works. Even the textbooks will start to describe how the legislation, in effect, took away from the American people or from Congress the control over our financial system, if you will. But yes, Lincoln was over the barrel, and we'll circle back to my experience, on that day, and we'll talk more too about my experience on Wall Street and what I've had to deal with being a Wall Street whistleblower.
All right, let's do that when we come back. Pick up where we left off after the first break.
Okay.
Had a nice little digression there, and there's no problem with that whatsoever. It's a great topic. We're talking to Andrea Psoras, who was a eyewitness to the demolitions of the WTC, and she knows a whole lot more, and we're going to find out about that in the coming hour. You're listening to The Grassy Knoll with Vyzygoth and Thought Criminal. All right. We'll be back after a couple of messages.
the sunshine, baby, when it's mild. But I call you stormy today. All of a sudden, that old rain's falling down, and my world is cloudy and gray. You've gone away, oh stormy, oh stormy. Bring back that sunny day. Yesterday's love was like a warm summer breeze, but like the weather it changed.
The following program contains the truth and is void where prohibited, taxed, or otherwise restricted by law. Parental guidance suggested.
Yes, we're back. The Grassy Knoll, AM 1350 WVCF, AM 1400 WZHR. We have with us Andrea Psoras, who's telling us about her experiences on September 11, 2001. And Andrea, also, I think you might remember, I told you that I was just across the river from you, minding my own business, having a very nice day. As you said, the day was crystalline. It was absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, you shared that with me, and you'll want to share with the viewers what you and I both think happened to you that morning while you were there and what you heard.
Do you want to talk about that now, about the...
Yeah, by all means, because then what we can do is we can circle back on what I began to see while I watched the buildings burn. But I think you and I attempt to figure what time you happened to have heard what you heard that morning.
Yeah,
I have not been able to ascertain whether or not there were, like, fighter jets or anything like that in the area. But, if you remember, a lot of things weren't scrambled when they should have been.
Oh yeah, and my memory is faulty because I didn't have a watch, and I was walking about, really lost track of time. My feeling was that it was about 9:40. I may be wrong, but I heard a deafening roar, and I thought immediately that there was a big airliner that was in trouble because we are in a flight path, but of course up there, they should never have been, quote, that low. And I thought maybe an airliner was in trouble and headed for Teterboro, which would have been a really hairy landing for the pilots. But I also wondered if there was ever a fighter jet that was in the vicinity. If there wasn't, then I could have quite possibly have heard what would have been the second airliner that crashed into the WTC.
See, it's possible that you did, and I'll share with you why. And you see, this actually brings up something that seems to be a significant point of debate now, because Joyce Riley and Dave Von Kleist have put out a DVD called 9/11
in plain sight,
or something like that.
Yeah,
and
in plain sight.
What they're talking about is something that I had already had concerns with respect to in hearing an engine or hearing, you know, this motor noise on whatever this aircraft was. Now, we're told so much disinformation by the administration that at this point, everything they have told us, or virtually everything they've told us, is on the table as far as I'm concerned, meaning that it's all subject to question. I mean, they've told us things that there were 19 hijackers. Well, frankly, John Rappaport figured out a couple of years ago, or learned a couple of years ago, that apparently at least a couple of these guys are alive. And then, and meanwhile, what also is something of concern, and one of the things that he corroborated was that there were no Muslim names on the passenger manifest. And I looked at the passenger manifest myself. There were no Muslim names on these passenger manifests. So you have to ask yourself, and then the administration turned around and said that the alleged hijackers were not flying under assumed identities. Well, this all is so odd, you know? And so then if you start to put together all the mosaic pieces of this mosaic puzzle, when the airlines came out from the get-go and wanted protection so that they couldn't be sued, and I coincidentally heard through the grapevine from a woman who had worked as a flight attendant for the airlines, that the alleged hijackers allegedly had flight uniforms. They had airline staff uniforms. So this means that the people were not walking through the passenger gates. They did not have to be, a wand was not put on them to determine if they had, you know, metal or weapons or anything like that. They were able to enter the planes as if they were staff. And what I thought was perhaps they actually were, that they may actually have been airline staff. See?
Now going back, though, I wanted you to capture
my sense of horror.
Well, yeah, and also I think we left you off going around Bessie Street, was it?
Yes, exactly. I actually was 1 or 2 blocks farther north, but the towers are so huge.
Right.
I don't recall whether, you see, and actually 7 World Trade at that point, which was still standing. Everything was still standing. It was only the towers at that point that were burning. And, I'm attempting to not stand there riveted to the ground because it's such a shock. It was such an incredibly shocking thing. I had supervised an office in One World Trade for a maritime company. I had actually worked in One World Trade for perhaps 4 or 5 years in the mid '80s, and then do we have another break coming up or
no?
Okay.
I'll always play the music to warn you, Andrea.
And I had been in the towers. I had been in One World Trade the night before because I was a member of a professional association, and still am. However, our suite of offices used to be on the 44th floor of One World Trade Center. So I was in the offices the night before, and I was surfing the web, and I had downloaded some things on some controversial topics, which we can weave into our program for the listeners a little later, if you want to introduce it.
Okay.
In any event, and I emailed that to the receptionist, and I figured the next day I'll get over there, and then the following day there was going to be a program on handling corporate crisis, and I had met with a PR firm that handles corporate crisis. I have a sort of a unique background on Wall Street, which enables me to handle that kind of work or work with banks to handle that kind of public profile work, and I was interested with the company, and although we left off things a little loose earlier in the summer, I was sort of looking forward to this conference, although financially I was wondering how I was going to swing it. So, meanwhile, however, it was just sort of a shocking thing, and under lots of different circumstances, except by the grace of God, I would have been in the towers that morning. I would have been in the towers perhaps for meetings. I would have been in the towers to shop at the local drugstore chain. Mm-hmm. You run the scenario. Having worked and lived in New York, having had a life fairly involved, my eyeglasses, my optometrist. Eyes on the World used to be in the concourse of One World Trade Center. And I'll share with your listeners, the Friday night before, I was going to go meet up with a friend, and as I was headed back home that night, I walked through the concourse, and something alerted me to think about Eyes on the World, my eyeglasses shop. And as I looked for the place in the concourse where Eyes on the World I knew to be, and it wasn't there. And then something crashed through my thoughts and asked me or inferred to me, what if it's not there? And I remember thinking back to it, Eyes on the World or something bigger than that, and not there meaning, well, Eyes on the World also is located in Greenwich Village, and then I remember thinking of something much more ominous in the thoughts. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
The thoughts coming to me seemed more ominous, and I wouldn't call them premonition-like because when we deal with these thoughts across our mind and these different and whether they be spirit or whether they be from some other source, and you're attempting to discern what it is that is attempting to communicate with you, And so, meanwhile, as I'm watching the towers burn, now this is the following Tuesday, I'm watching the towers burn, and I had actually forgotten about what happened the previous Friday night while I was contemplating that Eyes on the World was no longer in the World Trade Center concourse, and wondering if it was, had gone back up to its other office in the village. But that was all sort of irrelevant in a way. The second tower, as I continue east, then also comes into view. And you see, the complex was set up where you had 7 World Trade. This is going from north to south. You have 7 World Trade, Vesey Street, 6 World Trade, 1 World Tower 1, they call. You had a hotel, which had been trashed during the '93 explosion. I I'm pretty certain it was, our black baggers like CIA, and they used, whoever they wanted to use, and they painted it to have been, quote unquote Islamic fundamentalist terrorists. But, it just fits the scenario of what we know to be happening. And, then there was two World Trade. And both towers then were in view. One World Trade, however, was sort of obstructing my full view of two World Trade, but both of them were boiling with black smoke and orange flame. And so, but two had been hit lower, and two was hit on the southeast corner.
Right, that was the South Tower as we know it, right?
Exactly. And now I'm told over the years since this has happened, I'm told, number one, and my knowledge of commercial aviation is that that's a very difficult turn to make coming down the Hudson Valley, to make that kind of left 90-degree turn where you hang a left at the World Financial Center and then you trash the planes into the towers.
They don't do that very often, yeah.
Well, keeping in mind that, they make this big deal about these supposed Islamic types who were taking flight training at some school down in your area, in the Orlando area, and commercial aviators say, that's extremely difficult to do with big jets, and where an inexperienced pilot would really not be able to do that.
Right. That's all. That whole thing was for show. We all know that.
Absolutely. Well, see, and that's why too. Let's question too what the materials of these aircraft, and I'm going to call them aircraft at this point, because I actually remember seeing some photo of the second jet, and it looked, given how large 767s are, it looked way too small on the side of the building, and how the wings were spread back more like a military jet. You know what I'm saying?
Well, let me share you something with this. When you made an allusion to Van Kleist's movie 9/11 in Plain Sight. Let me just share you what the News with Views article said about a viewing of that movie out in Sacramento not too long ago. It's dated August 13th, 2004. It says, other footage includes several women who had a very clear view watching the second plane hit and were yelling, that wasn't American Airlines. It wasn't American Airlines going into that building. And that's just one of the things that I would share with you. And real quickly, another one, and this is very indicting. Did you ever hear of a gentleman by the name of Mark Bernbach?
I've not heard of.
Okay,
go ahead.
He's an employee of Fox News.
Yes, I've heard it mentioned that he was broadcasting live on the spot. That's right.
I think he's an ex-employee of Fox News, by the way.
So I've heard, too, and apparently he can't be reached right now.
So paraphrased, it says, Bernbach was close to the path of the second plane and had a good long look at what he describes that was not a commercial airliner. The plane that hit the second tower had no windows. Bernbach was very clear about that. The plane had some kind of blue logo on the front near the nose and looked like a cargo plane. This point was driven to the viewer several times, along with the comment from this Fox employee that, quote, this plane wasn't from around here or anything you'd ever see take off from the airport, unquote. There you go.
You know what's amazing is that, Jim Mars...
Here or anything you'd ever see...
recall whose program he was on Dave Von Kleist and Joyce's program, or whether he was on Alex Jones' program recently. However, Jim Mars was observing that, or it might have even have been Jack Blood, but he was observing about how the description that, and apparently he has a book also on all of this, but that this was not a commercial liner, and it confirmed that what I'd observed about the engine noise. Okay? Mm-hmm. And what my suspicion is that Lockheed Martin was probably in the Energy Task Force meetings. Norman Mineta had been one of the holdovers from the Clinton administration after, where he was, pinpointed or targeted to have a seat at the table after he had worked for Lockheed Martin for 5 years and had learned probably all their technology. So you had the combination of Sandy Berger in the Clinton administration, who had been a trade attorney before Clinton made him his national security advisor. So here, Lockheed Martin had been caught in the late winter. Do we have music coming up?
Yeah, finish your thought. We'll go.
Okay. Well, here, Lockheed Martin was caught violating export licenses, or at least one export license, by selling sensitive technology, radar technology, I think, to China, to the People's Republic of China.
That's why we love them.
So put it all together.
That's right. You're listening to the Grassy Knoll on AM 1350 WDCF, AM 1400 WZHR in the towns that still exist after Charlie's passing by, and that's Dade City, Zephyr Hills.
New Tampa.
What would that be?
That would be
New Tampa. All right, we'll be back after these messages. Stay with us.
Sits on the dock, fish in the water, I don't know her name, she's a fisherman's daughter, Come on down to my boat, baby. Come on down where we can play. Come on down to my boat, baby. Come on down, we'll sail away. So nice, like she wants to come with me, But she's tied to the dock and she can't get free.
You are listening to the Grassy Knoll on WDCF.
Yes, we are. We're back. The rain is falling. That's okay. We don't have any tornadoes. Charlie is now beacon northeast across Zalfo Springs, still getting close to our area, but not necessarily past us.
Mm-hmm.
This is our wonderful Friday the 13th. Category 4 hurricane is now, thankfully, starting to degrade. And with us today, Andrea Psoras, who is a witness to what I'm calling the WTC demolitions. We got a couple of things for you. We got a statement that you might want to respond to, okay?
Thank you. Go ahead.
From a listener. And I want to tell people again, you can instant message us on the AOL address, AM1350WDCF. You can send a Hotmail or whatever to Vyzygoth at hotmail.com. It's VYZYGOTH. It says, the person says, Building 7 is what convinced the individual as, in the way that it fell, that, something stunk. Do you want to jump across to 7 or?
Well, what we can do is we can pick up 7 because 7 didn't come down. They didn't trash 7 until later in the day.
Yeah, about what, 8 to 10 hours later, right?
It was dusk or 5-ish. It was dinner time-ish, but
Right.
It's hard for me to remember only because while I was hearing the reporting and I happened to have been back at my apartment, at that point I was in Chelsea. It was actually, I was staying with a friend at that point.
And funny, it felt like the other two, but no plane went into it, huh?
No plane, no debris, large debris. When the towers deteriorated very symmetrically, they went into their foundations, and that was just one of the most remarkable and professional demolition jobs that God, there's nothing casual you could say. Professional destroyed a major office complex and professionally demolished the 2 largest buildings in the world, or 2 of the largest buildings in the world. And I mean, I can sometimes barely find words to describe my sense of disgust, fury, my call for impeachment, trials for treason. Because I knew about North Woods at the point. But as I'll share back with you, as I'm witnessing the towers burn, and I was torn with whether what I should do. But I just had this unction I should probably continue to make my way to an area where I was out of perhaps God only knows. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who could have predicted all of that except for the people who were on the inside? And perhaps if I was aware of PNAC, perhaps if I'd put together keeping Norma Mineta at, and George Tenet, in the Bush administration, perhaps if I had really thought that they were going to attempt to do a Reichstag on us or something like that, I might have, but there were no illusions. I knew that they'd done something like a Northwoods, but I just would not have put everything together. And I have other things that distract me. I have attempting to get my Wall Street professional situation back on the right path. I have family that I have close relationships with in Pennsylvania. But, again, and meanwhile, there are other things that can interfere with, with our interests, our understanding, and even in the Lord. They interfere with us with our relationship with the Lord. So we have to be mindful to, keep our heart, not let the thorns and thistles impair our relationship, not only with the Lord, but with the loved ones around us. And so, in any event, as I'm passing, by the time I get up to I walked past the gun club that I wanted to join. And I had been earlier this summer. Yeah, I was going to join a shooting club. I swear, I shouldn't swear, but I'm telling you. There was a shooting club around the corner from a squash club where I used to occasionally play squash.
We like the gun club better.
Yeah, well, I want to tell you, it was really interesting. And I was hanging out there with the libertarians. And we met a guy who was a member at that shooting club, and coincidentally was NYPD, and he was also an attorney, and he was going to help us if we wanted conceal and carry licenses, which are extraordinarily difficult to have in New York. And in the Lord, I don't need to do that. I mean, owning a gun to do like sports shooting or whatever with it versus, conceal and carry wasn't something I needed to cross over with. And so I had filed that away. However, I crossed, right where the shooting club was, and there was a huge hunk of debris. And Webb Ferry and I have had this debate over Webb Ferry, who's a reasonably respected researcher.
Good old Rosalie, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I found some, fairly credible things that Webb Ferry along the ways, and it wasn't just with respect to the events of September 11th. However, Webb Ferry, and I said, honestly, I remember Webb Ferry emailing me a photo, and I said, look, honestly, it's hard to tell, not only from the photo, but what street this is, where this particular piece of debris, which looked like sort of like an engine fuselage, but I couldn't, or an engine, one of the engine mounts. And I said, I'm just not certain. And I can't conjecture whether or not, this was because what Webb Ferry, has purported is that it was a very sophisticated hologram. Whether or not, no, I know what I heard with regard to this aircraft engine.
Yeah, we had a shriek in the studio that said, what? Yeah, we're not buying holograms, but go ahead.
Well, honestly, I don't either, other than the fact that, keep in mind how many people actually did see things, the aircraft that hit the buildings. And, where are these people now with respect to what the administration turns around and says were 767s that hit these buildings? And I don't buy into that at this point. You see, even though I didn't see what hit the buildings, I can't buy into that.
Did you did not see any of the strikes, but you heard the second craft?
I heard the second jet, and I'm going to tell you, I did not hear the second jet hit the building. But because it was weird. I heard the motor of the second aircraft, but it's like all of a sudden it just passed, and that's really bizarre because 767s, these passenger jets are huge. And I mean, yes, of course, One World Trade and Two World Trade both each took up one city block each. I mean, each had their own zip code numbers. Because you had like more than 25,000 people working in each building.
Right. Oh, by the way, Andrew, do you know definitively what the total capacity could have been of workers in both buildings?
Well, that's a good question. I hear numbers between 50 and 100,000 people, but I do know that the buildings were leased more than 90%.
Oh, whoa. All right.
Okay, so, I mean, at that point, we were sort of in a doldrum. The market had cratered, around the summer of 2000s, the bubble started to burst. And things on Wall Street were terribly quiet when the Bush administration first got in. And so as I had passed the shooting club where I wanted to join, and I get to Broadway. I get to a block or two below City Hall, where Mayor Bloomberg's office now is. But I'm standing there, and I hear this deep rumbling coming from the vicinity of the foundation of Six World Trade. And I know the complex well. I mean, remember, I'd worked there, but I'm hearing this deep rumbling, and at this point, I know for a fact there are no fault lines in the bedrock underneath the complex. And I surmise that given what was happening, it's improbable that any subways were running through the area. Improbable. And so, let's just say, how convinced I was, I knew I was hearing explosives. And the incredible thing was, not much but a few minutes, but like moments later, and I want you to remind me of something, because there were other thoughts that I was deliberating when I heard those explosives. And I think I've shared this with you at another point. Do you want me to start sharing that now, or do you want to put it at another point?
Well, that settles it for us, doesn't it? This will be the end of our first segment. And Andrew, we come back from the top of the hour.